Jaren slammed his fist against the console, frustration boiling over as the warning lights flashed red. His pulse was racing, each beat thrumming in his ears, drowning out the urgent beeps and alarms from the ship's system. He had escaped before. Hell, he'd made it out of situations that would have killed most, but this time? This time it felt different. And there was one thing he knew for sure, he wasn't about to let the Zarkar assassins, led by Cade, get the best of him. Rhea, his first officer, glanced up from her terminal. She was calm, too calm for Jaren's liking, considering the situation they were in. Their ship, the Peregrine, was on the run from 5 enemy ships, and her shields were already down to less than half. They were flying through asteroid fields and ion storms at maximum speed, but it wasn't enough to throw them off the trail. Shields at 47%, Captain, Rhea's voice cut through his thoughts, flat and steady. We've got to either outrun them or get creative. Jaren didn't need to look at the monitor to know what was happening. He could feel it, those Zarkar ships were too close. He didn't recognize the other ships in the fleet, but the last time he'd faced off with Cade, the assassin had been flying one of the Zarkar's signature ships, sleek, fast, and deadly. There was a cold familiarity to the feeling creeping up his spine now. They're catching up, Rhea continued, her fingers tapping at the screen with nervous precision. We're not going to make it to the planet without a fight. Jaren swore under his breath. He'd been planning to land on this barren world and lay low for a while, resupply, rest, and regroup. It was supposed to be a quick stop. But now, as the chase grew tighter, it felt less like a break and more like a trap. No planet was worth the risk they were taking by getting so close to it, but he had no choice. The planet's psi coordinates had been locked in for too long. The planet's barren surface and the wreckage of ancient ruins were supposed to be their sanctuary, a place where even the relentless Zarkar mercenaries wouldn't dare to follow. But now Jaren wasn't so sure. The chase had gone on for days, and their pursuers weren't the type to give up easily. Not when Cade was leading them. You think we'll make it? Rhea asked, her voice a touch more strained now. Jaren threw a glance at the view screen, where the 5 Zarkar ships had fallen into formation behind them, perfectly positioned to pounce. His gut twisted. They had to make it, but how? If he had learned one thing about Cade, it was that the assassin would anticipate every move Jaren made. We have to, Jaren muttered through gritted teeth. I'm not going out like this. Not today. The comms crackled suddenly, sending a cold shiver down his spine. The voice that came through was distorted, robotic, but there was no mistaking the deadly precision behind it. You're running out of time, Jaren. Cade's voice was clipped, calm, as always. You can't outrun us forever. You know what happens when you get cornered. Jaren's jaw clenched. Cade wasn't even pretending to be a professional anymore, this was personal. The last time they'd crossed paths, Jaren had betrayed the Zarkar assassins, taken something from them, something valuable. They didn't take kindly to that. Cade didn't take kindly to that. Jaren had been lucky to survive the first hunt, but this was different. This time, the assassin wasn't simply hunting him. This time, the man wanted to make an example out of him. We'll see about that, Cade, Jaren said, his voice low and steady despite the fear gnawing at him. I'm not running anymore. Rhea raised an eyebrow, glancing at him. What are you thinking? Jaren's hands tightened around the console. His eyes flicked to the systems, quickly processing what he had left. I'm thinking we have one shot at this. We can't outrun them, but we can outsmart them. The enemy fleet was gaining, now just a few thousand kilometers away, their weapons primed and ready to fire. The Peregrine's shields wouldn't hold much longer. But Jaren didn't need shields to escape. He needed to outmaneuver Cade's fleet. It wasn't just about survival, it was about making Cade doubt every decision he made. If they could throw off the chase, they could land on the planet and hide long enough to figure out their next move. The asteroid field ahead provided their best chance. It was dense and treacherous, even for skilled pilots. If they could slip through it, the enemy would have to pull back, at least for a while. And if Jaren could make a crazy enough maneuver, the Zarkars might not even know where he went. We're going through the asteroid field, Jaren said, turning to Rhea with a wild grin. Her expression went from worry to incredulous. The asteroid field? Captain, that's suicide. We don't have a choice, Jaren replied, slamming his hand on the helm. Prepare for evasive maneuvers. We're going in. Rhea swallowed hard, but she didn't argue. Her fingers flew across the controls, preparing for the risky maneuver. The Peregrine dipped sharply, diving toward the asteroid field as the ship's systems beeped urgently. With a flick of a switch, Jaren cut the main engines, relying solely on the momentum they had gained. As the ship shot forward, the asteroid field ahead came alive, massive rocks hurtling in all directions. Jaren's eyes narrowed in concentration as he took the controls, guiding the Peregrine with precision. The ship swerved around giant tumbling asteroids, the hull rattling as they skimmed dangerously close to rocky surfaces. He could hear Rhea cursing under her breath as she worked to adjust their trajectory, trying to keep them from slamming into anything too big. Behind them, the Zarkar fleet wasn't far behind. The first enemy ship broke off and flew into the asteroid field, its pilot evidently confident enough to follow. But Jaren knew they wouldn't all follow. Not without hesitation. As he predicted, the Zarkar ships pulled back slightly, creating space between themselves and the field of flying debris. He didn't have time to wonder if they had made the right call, he couldn't afford to think about that now. If he took one wrong turn, it would all be over. Then it happened. One of the ships, a sleek, black vessel, plunged into the field after them, unwilling to let them go. Jaren cursed under his breath. He hadn't expected them to be this relentless. Get ready for a fight, he muttered, his fingers dancing over the controls as he swerved the Peregrine hard to the right. The ship jerked, and Rhea gripped the armrest beside her seat to keep herself steady. The Zarkar ship was gaining. It was closing in fast. We don't have long before they fire, Rhea said, her voice rising in panic. What's your plan? Jaren took a breath, his mind working at 100 miles an hour. Plan? I've got one, but it's going to take everything I've got. With a final, defiant grin, he slammed the thrusters back to full power. Hold on. The Peregrine shuddered violently as it plunged deeper into the asteroid field, narrowly avoiding a massive chunk of rock that spun dangerously close. Jaren's hands were a blur on the controls, guiding the ship with practiced precision through the chaos of rock and debris. It felt like the universe itself was trying to crush them into oblivion, but Jaren's focus was razor-sharp. Behind him, the enemy ship, a black Zarkar cruiser, was close, too close for comfort. You think you can outrun me, Jaren? Cade's voice crackled through the comms, distorted but unmistakable. You're only delaying the inevitable. Jaren's fingers tightened on the helm as the Zarkar ship followed their every move, matching their every twist and turn. It was almost like Cade could read his mind. But Jaren knew something Cade didn't. He was betting everything on the fact that Cade's ship, despite its speed, wasn't built for this. The asteroid field was a labyrinth, a deadly game of cat and mouse, and Jaren had the advantage of knowing its terrain. Captain, this is insane, Rhea said, her voice steady despite the chaos. If we don't shake them soon, we're not getting out of here. The field is getting thicker. She was right. The field wasn't just a chaotic mess of rocks, it was an unpredictable, shifting labyrinth. And the further they went in, the more the asteroids seemed to change shape. It was a game of timing, one wrong move, and they'd be reduced to space dust. Just keep them off our tail, Rhea, Jaren said through gritted teeth. If I can get them in the right position, we might be able to use the rocks to our advantage. I'm trying. Rhea shouted back. But they're keeping up. It's like they know where we're going. Jaren's mind raced. It was true, Cade was good, too good. But if there was one thing Jaren had learned over the years, it was that you couldn't predict everything. Not even a seasoned killer like Cade could see every angle. Jaren's eyes flicked to the screen ahead as another asteroid rocketed toward them. Hold tight, Jaren muttered, slamming the controls left. The ship veered sharply, and for a moment, it felt like they were going to collide. But just at the last second, the Peregrine slid under the asteroid, its hull scraping against the rough surface with a loud screech. The ship jerked, and Jaren gritted his teeth as he fought to keep them on course. Behind them, the Zarkar ship was forced to take a wider turn, losing precious seconds. "That's it," Jaren said, a grim smile spreading across his face. "If we can keep making them follow us like this, they'll start losing their precision. And that's when we'll get them." Rhea didn't look convinced. Her fingers flew across her console, but her voice betrayed her concern. "The Zarkar fleet is still behind us. You're expecting Cade to make a mistake, but he's one of the best." Jaren grinned wider, his eyes alight with a fierce determination. "And that's exactly why we're going to make him think he has the upper hand." The minutes stretched into eternity as they navigated the asteroid field, the ship dodging, weaving, and narrowly avoiding collisions. But as the field thickened, Jaren began to feel a flicker of doubt in his chest. The rocks were getting denser, more unpredictable, and there were too many opportunities for disaster. They couldn't keep this up forever. "We've got to make a move," Rhea said, her voice edged with desperation. "We can't keep this up much longer." Jaren's mind raced. There had to be something, some way to gain the upper hand. A reckless idea flashed through his head, one that made his heart race with adrenaline. It was risky, bordering on insane. But sometimes, in situations like this, insanity was the best option. "Rhea," he said, his voice calm, even though his mind was working overtime. "You're going to hate me for this." "I'm already starting to," she said dryly. "I'm going to make a hard turn. Full speed boost. When I do, you've got one chance to disable their engines using the secondary weapon systems." Rhea's eyes went wide. "Disable their engines? You're asking me to fire while we're flying through an asteroid field at full speed?" "Exactly," Jaren said, smirking despite the tension. "They're good, Rhea. But they're not expecting us to fight dirty." There was a long pause, and for a moment, Jaren wondered if she was going to refuse. But then she nodded, her expression hardening. "All right, Captain. I'll do it. Then here we go." Jaren slammed the ship into full power, sending the Peregrine surging forward with a burst of speed that pushed the ship's limits. He had one chance to get Cade's ship in position, and only one chance to pull this off. As they flew deeper into the field, the asteroid density increased. The rocks were now massive, some the size of small moons. Jaren dodged and weaved through the rocks, using the ship's superior agility to stay just out of range of the pursuing Zarkar ship. Behind him, the enemy pilot was doing everything in his power to close the gap. But Jaren knew that Cade, for all his skill, wouldn't expect the sudden change in tactics that was about to unfold. The Peregrine veered sharply to the left, turning almost 90 degrees as Jaren pushed the thrusters to the limit. The ship rocked violently under the strain, but the maneuver worked. The Zarkar ship followed suit, but it had lost its perfect line, having to take a much wider turn. That was the moment Jaren had been waiting for. "Now, Rhea," he shouted. The sound of her fingers slamming down on the weapon systems was followed by a deep, guttural hum as the secondary weapons powered up. Without missing a beat, Rhea released the charge. A flash of blue energy shot out from the Peregrine's weapons array, striking the rear engines of the Zarkar ship. The impact was immediate. A surge of power crackled across the enemy vessel's hull, and a moment later, their engine's energy output spiked and then sputtered, cutting out completely. The Zarkar ship lurched, losing speed and dropping quickly into a dangerous spin. "Got him," Rhea said, her voice triumphant. "They're dead in the water." Jaren grinned as he glanced back, watching the Zarkar ship drift slowly, disabled and completely out of the fight. "One down," Jaren said, a slight chuckle escaping his lips. "But we're not out of the woods yet." As the asteroid field continued to swirl around them, Jaren could feel his heart slow slightly. The next challenge was just beginning. They had to get to the planet. But now, with one enemy ship disabled, they might have a better chance. The Peregrine surged forward again, its engines roaring back to life as they prepared to take the next step. Jaren knew this wouldn't be the end of the fight. The real challenge was still ahead, and Cade wasn't going to give up so easily. But for the first time in a long while, Jaren felt a sense of control. Jaren's fingers gripped the controls tightly, the pulse of the ship's engines reverberating through his chest. The Zarkar ship they just disabled was now drifting, its once pristine hull marred by the blue energy blast that had cut through its engines. They'd taken out one of their pursuers, but that didn't mean they were safe. Cade had too many tricks up his sleeve, and Jaren knew the assassin wasn't the type to make mistakes. Rhea's voice broke through his thoughts, sharp and focused. "We've got another one on our tail, Captain. And this time, it's not stopping." Jaren glanced up at the view screen, seeing a new ship, the largest of the Zarkar fleet, closing in fast. It was sleek, dark, and menacing, built for speed and precision. He'd seen that ship before, though he'd hoped never to see it again. The Night Strike. "Damn it, Cade," Jaren muttered under his breath. Rhea, who had been monitoring the battle, looked back at him with a look of grim determination. "He's not giving up, is he?" Jaren shook his head. "Not a chance." Behind them, the asteroid field was starting to thin out, the dense concentration of debris now spread out into larger pockets of empty space. But the Night Strike wasn't bothering with the asteroids, it was too fast, its engines built for precision, tracking them through the debris like a predator hunting its prey. There was no escaping it in this field, not with the damage they'd already taken. They were about to run out of cover, and when they did, Cade would have a clear shot. Jaren tapped a few commands into his console, trying to calculate their best course. The Peregrine was faster than the Zarkar ships, but not by much, and certainly not when they were flying into increasingly open space. It would be a matter of seconds before Cade's ship would line up and fire. "We need to make it to the planet." "Now," Jaren said, his voice urgent. Rhea nodded, her fingers flying over her terminal. "I'm setting a course, Captain, but we've got a problem. The Night Strike's already intercepting us. If we don't do something quick, it'll be too late." Jaren's heart raced. This was the moment that would decide everything. The Peregrine had no more tricks up its sleeve. They couldn't outrun Cade anymore, and they couldn't stay in the asteroid field. They were running out of options. He didn't think. He acted. "Do it," Jaren said. "I've got an idea." Before Rhea could question him, Jaren slammed the controls forward, sending the ship into a sharp dive toward the planet below. "Captain, what are you?" Rhea's voice rose with panic as the ship jolted downward, veering dangerously close to the planet's atmosphere. "We can't run anymore, Rhea." Jaren shouted back, locking eyes with her for a brief moment before returning his focus to the controls. "But we can hide." Rhea was silent for a moment, processing what he'd just said. Then, with a hesitant nod, she threw her weight into the task, working to keep the ship stable as they plummeted toward the planet. The planet's atmosphere loomed below them, vast, dark, and stormy. The clouds were thick, swirling with unpredictable lightning. Jaren had no idea what the surface was like, but if there was one thing he knew about Cade, it was that he wasn't fond of unpredictability. "Okay," Rhea said, her voice barely audible over the ship's thrusters. "But if this doesn't work, we'll be burned to a crisp before we hit the surface." "Then we'll make sure it works," Jaren replied, his voice unwavering. "Cade can't track us if we're flying blind." They were going to gamble everything on this. The Night Strike was too fast, and Cade would never expect them to go into the planet's atmosphere at full speed. It was a desperate move, but Jaren had no other options. He threw the ship into another steep dive, pushing the Peregrine even closer to the thick storm clouds below. The atmosphere began to ripple with turbulence, and the ship rocked under the pressure, the hull groaning in protest. Outside, the sky turned from black to deep gray, thick clouds flashing with bolts of lightning. The storm was fierce and violent, but it was their best shot at losing Cade. The Zarkar assassin would have to pull back, there was no way he'd follow them into this mess. But just as Jaren began to feel a flicker of hope, the comms crackled again, and Cade's voice cut through the static. "You think you can outrun me?" The words were cold, and the hint of amusement was unmistakable. "I'm not going to let you slip away this time, Jaren." Jaren's heart skipped a beat. The assassin was still following them. Still tracking them. Damn it, Jaren muttered under his breath. Rhea, you'd better be right about this. The Peregrine tore through the clouds, the ship shuddering violently as they descended. The turbulence was unlike anything Jaren had experienced in years. The ship jolted so violently that Rhea had to brace herself against the console, her knuckles white from the strain. Suddenly, the comms crackled once again, but this time, it was a different voice, a panicked voice. Captain, we've lost him. The night strike it's pulling back. Jaren's eyes widened as he looked at the readouts. The ship's sensors were registering a sudden drop in the proximity readings. Kate had stopped chasing them. The assassin had pulled out of the atmosphere and was pulling back into orbit, no doubt realizing that the storm was too much for his precise navigation systems. Nice, Jaren muttered, allowing himself a small smile. Let's see how Cade likes a little unpredictability. But they weren't out of the woods yet. The storm raged around them, massive lightning bolts crackling through the sky, and Jaren couldn't even see the ground below through the thick clouds. He was flying blind, relying on instinct and faith that Rhea's calculations would guide them safely through the worst of it. Hold on, Jaren said, gripping the controls tighter. This is going to get rough. The ship's engines howled as they pushed forward into the heart of the storm, lightning flashing across their path. The Peregrine began to buck wildly, the turbulence making it nearly impossible to keep a steady course. Jaren fought against the pull of the storm, his hands moving instinctively over the controls as they descended even deeper. For what felt like an eternity, they plunged toward the unknown. Suddenly, through the chaotic blur of clouds, the faint outline of the planet's surface began to materialize. A massive, rocky landscape stretched out beneath them, covered in jagged mountains and vast plains. It was rugged, barren, exactly what they needed. Jaren gritted his teeth, pushing the ship lower. The landing would be rough, but it was their only chance. Rhea's voice broke through the chaos, strained but relieved. We're close. I can see the surface. You've got this, Jaren. Jaren didn't answer. He couldn't. There was no time for words. With a final burst of speed, the Peregrine hit the surface, skidding across the rocky terrain before slamming to a jarring halt. The ship's systems blinked out briefly, and the turbulence subsided. They were on the ground. The silence in the ship was deafening. The hum of the engines had ceased, and the only sound was the steady, strained breathing of Jaren and Rhea as they sat in the cockpit, still gripping their harnesses. The Peregrine was alive, its engines sputtering slightly as it stood still on the rocky surface. They had made it through the storm, crash landing onto a desolate planet. For now, they were safe. But only just. Did we do it? Rhea asked, her voice ragged with exhaustion. Is he gone? Jaren's eyes narrowed as he scanned the readouts. Outside the cockpit, the storm continued to rage, dark clouds swirling overhead. He couldn't see much beyond the immediate area around them, but the readings were clear. The night strike was nowhere near them anymore. Kate had pulled out, at least for now. We're alive, Jaren muttered, running a hand through his hair. But this is only temporary. Rhea exhaled slowly, releasing the tension that had been building in her shoulders. Temporary's good enough for me, she said. But we need to get moving. This isn't exactly the safest place to hang out for long. Who knows how long it will take for Cade to regroup and find us again. Jaren glanced out the cockpit window, looking at the barren, rocky wasteland stretching out before them. The land was jagged, with peaks rising sharply from the ground like a series of broken teeth, and the ground beneath the ship was cracked and arid. It wasn't a place anyone would want to be for long, but it was isolated, remote, and, most importantly, it was off the grid. Cade's tracking systems wouldn't be able to get a lock on them in this kind of terrain. They had time. We'll head to the mountains, Jaren said, turning back to the control panel. We can find shelter in the canyons up there. Get some supplies, maybe even some cover. We'll wait out the storm, figure out what to do next. Rhea nodded, though she didn't look entirely convinced. You think we can outrun him forever? Jaren didn't answer immediately. His fingers hovered over the ship's control panel as he thought it over. Cade was relentless, one of the best assassins in the galaxy, and he would never let go of a target once he'd set his sights on it. Jaren knew Cade would be back, eventually. But he also knew Cade wasn't invincible. He had weaknesses. And now, for the first time in a long while, Jaren had the advantage. "We don't need to outrun him forever," Jaren said, his voice steady. "We just need to outsmart him. And right now, we've got him exactly where we want him." Rhea raised an eyebrow. "You think so?" Jaren leaned back in his seat, his face breaking into a sly smile. "Oh, I know so." They both sat in silence for a moment, contemplating the enormity of their situation. They were stranded on an unknown planet, their enemies scattered but not defeated, with only each other to rely on. But Jaren had never been one to give up easily. And Rhea, for all her skepticism, was loyal to the core. They would find a way out of this. "Well," Rhea said, breaking the silence, "if we're going to be outsmarting Cade, we better have a good plan." Jaren nodded, his fingers tapping rhythmically on the console as he began calculating their next move. "First things first, we need to make sure Cade can't track us. That means getting rid of our ship's signature, masking our heat trails. We'll strip down the Peregrine, make it look like it's been abandoned. No heat signatures, no signals. Just us." "And after that?" Rhea asked. "Then," Jaren said, his grin widening, "we'll turn the tables. We've been running this whole time, but now it's our turn to hunt. Cade's about to learn that a human assassin can't just rely on technology to win." Rhea looked at him for a moment, her lips curving into a reluctant smile. "Well, I'll say this for you, Jaren, you sure know how to make things interesting." Jaren laughed, the sound light despite the heavy weight of their situation. "It's not about making things interesting. It's about survival." They both stood, gathering their gear and preparing to leave the ship. The Peregrine might have been their home, their safe haven, but it wouldn't help them if Cade tracked them down. They had to disappear into the wilderness, make themselves ghosts in the storm. And once they were out there, in the canyons and mountains, Jaren would make sure they were ready for whatever came next. Cade wouldn't expect them to fight back, but he would. As they stepped out of the ship, the wind howled through the desolate landscape, whipping dust and debris into the air. The planet was hostile, harsh, but it was also the perfect place to disappear. Jaren felt the familiar weight of his gun at his side, the tools of his trade. Rhea glanced around, her eyes scanning the area. "I don't like it," she said. "Feels like we're walking into a trap." "It's a trap we set ourselves," Jaren replied, his eyes glinting with determination. "We'll use the land against him. And when Cade thinks he's finally got us cornered, that's when we strike." They moved quickly, taking cover behind the jagged rocks as they made their way deeper into the canyons. The storm was still raging above them, the sky dark and threatening, but it worked in their favor. The clouds blocked out any satellite scans, and the winds masked their movements. They were ghosts now. Hours passed, and the further they ventured into the mountains, the more isolated and rugged the terrain became. The air grew thinner, and the cold began to seep into their bones. But Jaren didn't feel it, not yet. He was too focused on the task at hand. They would set traps, use the landscape to their advantage, and when Cade inevitably came after them, they would make sure he walked right into it. The storm above them began to lighten, and Jaren knew that Cade wouldn't stay gone for long. But that was fine. The longer they stayed hidden, the more desperate Cade would get. And desperation made mistakes. Finally, as the hours passed, Jaren and Rhea found a narrow, hidden ravine deep within the mountains, perfect for an ambush. They set up their defenses, hidden in the rocks, their backs to the stone as they waited. By the time Cade finally arrived, silent, as he always was, he walked right into their trap. He never saw it coming. With Cade down, and the dangers of the galaxy momentarily at rest, Jaren and Rhea stood victorious on the windswept planet, the storm finally clearing. The horizon stretched out before them, a new beginning, one they had fought for tooth and nail. We made it, Rhea said quietly, her voice filled with awe and relief. I can't believe we made it. Jaren smiled, clapping her on the back. It's not over yet. But we'll handle whatever comes next, together. And in the vast expanse of the unknown, where dangers always lurked and shadows threatened, Jaren knew one thing for certain: no matter what the galaxy threw at him next, he would always find a way to survive.